October 25, 1944. At 6:58 a.m., lookouts aboard the USS Samuel B. Roberts spotted 4 Japanese battleships emerging 15 miles northwest of Samar Island in the Philippines. The Roberts was a destroyer escort, a small warship displacing just 1,745 tons, armed with 2 5-inch guns and crewed by 224 sailors. Leading the enemy formation was the Yamato, a behemoth displacing 72,000 tons, mounting 9 massive 18.1-inch guns, capable of firing 3,200-pound shells up to 25 miles. Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, the captain of the Roberts, picked up the intercom. He informed his crew that a large Japanese fleet, consisting of 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and multiple destroyers, was heading directly toward their American task force, Taffy 3. Copeland told his men that this would be a fight against overwhelming odds, and that survival was unlikely, but they would inflict whatever damage they could. The Japanese center force was made up of 23 warships, totaling 200,000 tons. Opposing them was Taffy 3, 6 American escort carriers designed primarily for anti-submarine warfare and screened by 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts, a total of 7 small ships displacing only 25,000 tons. The Japanese fleet outweighed the American force 8-1. The American fleet was caught alone because Admiral William Halsey had taken every American battleship north overnight, chasing Japanese carriers, leaving Taffy 3 off Samar. American intelligence had mistakenly reported the Japanese center force was retreating, but at 3 a.m., it had transited the San Bernardino Strait undetected and was now closing at 30 knots. The escort carriers, with a maximum speed of 18 knots, could not outrun the battleships. In the Pacific War, 53 destroyer escorts had been commissioned, but none had ever engaged enemy battleships. Doctrine called for them to screen convoys against submarines, not charge battleships. At 7:05 a.m., Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Taffy 3, ordered his screen to attack. 3 destroyers, Johnston, Howell, and Herman, turned toward the enemy. Behind them came the 4 destroyer escorts, with the Roberts last in line. They had only minutes before the Japanese guns would open fire. Below decks on the Roberts, Chief Engineer Lieutenant Lloyd Trowbridge heard Copeland's announcement. Navy regulations limited the Roberts to 24 knots, but Trowbridge knew this would not be enough. He walked to the main control panel and began bypassing every safety system the Navy had installed. His crew watched in silence, understanding the necessity. At 7:16 a.m., the USS Johnston opened fire first. The enemy immediately returned fire with 14-inch shells from the battleship Congo. 7 minutes later, at 7:23 a.m., the Roberts turned toward the enemy. Copeland ordered flank speed, and Trowbridge's modifications pushed the destroyer escort to 28 knots, 4 knots faster than its design specifications. The ship vibrated and metal groaned as steam pressure gauges climbed into the red zone, but no one cared. Speed was life. The Japanese center force was spread across 10 miles of ocean, with the heavy cruiser Chikuma leading the right flank 8 miles ahead of the Yamato. The Roberts had to penetrate the Japanese screen, reach torpedo range, fire, and escape. Torpedo range was 5,000 yards, or 2.8 miles. The Roberts' 3 Mark 15 torpedoes could travel that distance at 46 knots. But getting within 5,000 yards meant running a gauntlet of shells from ships that could hit targets at 25,000 yards. At 7:32 a.m., 8-inch rounds from the heavy cruiser Chikuma began falling around the Roberts. Shells landed 50 yards off the port bow and 20 yards to starboard, with water columns towering over the mast. Copeland ordered a hard left, then hard right zigzag pattern to keep the enemy guessing. Gun Captain Lieutenant William Burton stood in the forward 5-inch gun mount. His crew of 10 men, with an average age of 22, had trained for months, but never against battleships. The gun could fire 15 rounds per minute, but Burton knew he had to conserve his total of 608 rounds of ammunition, 304 per gun, or the ship would run dry before the battle ended. At 7:38 a.m., Copeland announced they were closing for a torpedo attack. The Roberts was 7,000 yards from the Chikuma, still 2,000 yards too far. 2 more minutes at 28 knots, and 2 more minutes of shells falling around the ship. One direct hit from an 8-inch shell would penetrate the Roberts' thin hull plating and detonate, instantly killing everyone in that compartment. The forward gun mount had only 3/8-inch steel plating, designed to stop shrapnel, not 8-inch shells. At 7:40 a.m., the Roberts crossed the 5,000-yard mark and was at torpedo range. Copeland ordered the tubes fired, and 3 Mark 15 torpedoes launched from the starboard side. Travel time to target was approximately 2 minutes. The Roberts immediately reversed course, hard left rudder, and full speed away, trying to disappear into the smokescreen. Chikuma's lookout spotted the wakes, and the cruiser turned hard to port in an emergency maneuver. The first 2 torpedoes missed, and the third ran underneath the Chikuma without detonating. Mark 15 torpedo contact exploders had a 40% failure rate. The Roberts had fired 3 duds, but Copeland had achieved something invaluable. The Chikuma had turned away from the carriers, breaking off her attack run. She was now heading northwest away from Taffy 3, having lost 5 minutes of pursuit time. 5 minutes the escort carriers could use to run south toward potential rescue from Admiral Halsey's fleet. At 7:45 a.m., the Roberts emerged from the smokescreen. The Chikuma had resumed her course toward the carriers, now 8,000 yards away, too far for another torpedo run. Copeland ordered Burton to open fire with the forward 5-inch gun. The gun mount rotated, elevated to maximum range, and fired. After adjusting the aim, the 4th shot hit. The shell struck the Chikuma's forward superstructure, penetrated, and detonated inside, disabling 1/4 of the cruiser's main battery. Burton's crew settled into a rhythm: load, ram, fire, 15 rounds per minute. After 5 minutes of continuous fire, Burton had expended 75 rounds, 5% of his total ammunition, and had hits on the Chikuma. However, the cruiser was still firing back and still closing on the carriers. At 8:03 a.m., the USS Johnston took a hit from the battleship Congo, crippling its speed and wounding its captain. The destroyer Hull had already taken multiple hits, with its forward gun destroyed and one engine room flooded, reducing its speed to 15 knots. The Roberts was still intact, still making 28 knots, and still firing at the Chikuma, but ammunition was running critically low. After 18 minutes of continuous fire, Burton had expended 270 rounds from the forward gun, 90% of that mount's ammunition. With 34 rounds remaining, he had just over 2 minutes of continuous fire left. At 8:07 a.m., Copeland ordered Burton to shift fire to a new target. The heavy cruiser Tone had closed to 7,000 yards. The Tone, which mounted 8 8-inch guns, was firing at the escort carrier Gambier Bay. Burton traversed his gun mount, fired, and after one adjustment, hit the Tone's No. 2 turret. The shell penetrated the armored face and detonated inside, disabling 1/4 of the cruiser's main battery. The aft gun mount, under gunner's mate 3rd Class Paul Henry Carr, still had ammunition, 325 rounds. Carr, 20 years old, had never been in a surface action before. His crew had been firing continuously since 7:45 a.m., expending 324 rounds. Only 1 round remained. At 8:15 a.m., the Roberts' luck ran out. 3 Japanese heavy cruisers, Chikuma, Tone, and Haguro, had her bracketed and were closing. She was running out of sea room, smoke, and time. At 8:20 a.m., an 8-inch shell from the Chikuma struck the Roberts amidships on the port side. The shell penetrated, passed through the galley, and exited the starboard side without detonating, punching a 3-foot wide hole. Seawater began flooding the lower decks.
Damage control teams rushed to seal the breach with mattresses and shored up bulkheads, but the ship took on a 5-degree list to port. 2 minutes later, a second shell hit and detonated. The explosion tore through the crew's berthing compartment, instantly killing 6 men, rupturing steam lines and scalding 4 more sailors. With one boiler offline, the Robert's speed dropped to 24 knots, then 20, then dead in the water. At 8:25 a.m., Paul Carr's aft gun mount lost electrical power. The powertrain stopped. The ram and the firing mechanism went dead. The mount had to be operated manually. The rate of fire dropped from 15 rounds per minute to 6, but Carr's crew was fast and kept firing. They cranked the mount, loaded a 54-pound shell by hand, rammed it home, and fired. The gun barrel was now glowing red from the heat. Disaster struck the aft mount at 8:30 a.m. A powdered charge cooked off, spontaneous ignition from the overheated breech. The explosion tore through the gun mount, instantly killing 3 men and wounding 7 others. Shrapnel shredded the interior. The blast threw Carr backward, and a jagged piece of steel ripped him open from neck to groin. Dying on the deck, Carr saw 1 shell remaining in the ammunition rack, the last round in the magazine. He crawled toward it, grabbed the 54-pound shell, and held it against his chest, begging for it to be loaded. Machinist Mate Second Class Chalmer Gohane took the shell from Carr and tried to drag him away, but Carr refused to move, pointing at the breach, urging them to load the shell, fire the gun, and keep fighting. Gohane set the shell down and dragged Carr away. The gun was destroyed, the breach shattered, and there was no way to fire the last shell. Paul Carr died 5 minutes later, still trying to get back to his gun. At 8:35 a.m., the Roberts took another hit, a 14-inch shell likely from either the Congo or Haruna. The massive shell struck the starboard side, penetrated the No. 2 engine room, and detonated inside. The explosion tore a 40-foot-long, 10-foot-wide hole in the hull, flooding the engine room in 30 seconds and killing 8 men instantly. The Robert's speed dropped to 10 knots, then 5, then dead in the water. Copeland ordered all the remaining crew topside. The ship was dying, no power, no steering, 3 feet of water in the lower decks, and fires burning in 4 compartments. At 9:45 a.m., more shells hit. 6-inch rounds from the light cruiser Noshiro and 8-inch rounds from the Haguro pounded the helpless destroyer escort. The Roberts had become a stationary target. At 9:10 a.m., Copeland gave the order to abandon ship. 115 men were already dead or missing. The remaining 109 sailors went over the side. They had 1 remaining inflatable life raft designed to hold 16 men, and they put the wounded in it. Everyone else went into the water, clinging to 3 floater nets and debris. At 9:35 a.m., the Roberts rolled to port, its bow rising out of the water. It hung there for 10 seconds, then slipped beneath the surface, stern first, sinking in 600 fathoms, 3,600 feet deep. It was the deepest any American warship had been sunk in combat. 109 men were in the water. Many were wounded with burns, shrapnel, and broken bones. All were covered in thick, black fuel oil from the Roberts' ruptured tanks. The oil caused temporary blindness and stinging pain in their eyes, and vomiting if ingested. They had no food, no fresh water, and no rescue in sight. The battle was still raging around them, and Japanese warships steamed past without stopping. At 9:45 a.m., Admiral Takao Kurita ordered the Japanese center force to withdraw. His cruisers had taken heavy damage from the destroyers and aircraft. Chokiai was dead in the water, Chikuma was on fire, and 3 heavy cruisers were critically damaged. Kurita believed he was fighting fleet carriers and heavy cruisers of Admiral Halsey's 3rd Fleet, though he was wrong. The escort carriers of Taffy III were Liberty ship hulls with flight decks, and the destroyers were tin cans with 5-inch guns. This confusion saved the American invasion fleet. The battle off Samar was over, and the Japanese turned north towards the San Bernardino Strait. 3 American ships had been sunk, the destroyer escort Samar B. Roberts and the destroyers Johnston and Hull. The escort carrier Gambier Bay had also capsized. 1,277 American sailors were dead or missing, and another 1,000 wounded. But the invasion fleet at Leyte Gulf survived, and the Japanese had their last chance to stop the Philippine campaign. In the water off Samar, 109 survivors from the Roberts drifted. Silence settled over the ocean. The men clustered round the single life raft and 2 floater nets, spreading out over a quarter-mile of ocean, trying to stay together. The sun rose higher and the temperature climbed above 90 degrees. Dehydration was a serious concern. Wounds became infected within hours in the tropical heat. At 2 p.m. on October 25th, sharks arrived. Small, 6-foot black-tip reef sharks circled the survivors, bumping into men. Later, larger 8-foot and 10-foot tiger and bull sharks appeared, growing more aggressive. While survivors could not confirm any attacks, 2 men disappeared during the first night, with others hearing splashing and thrashing water. The night brought relative cold, dropping the water temperatures to 78 degrees. Hypothermia set in for the wounded, and 3 more men died during the first night from wounds, shock, and exposure. October 26th brought more sun and heat, making dehydration critical. Some men began hallucinating, seeing ships and land that were not there. 5 more died on the second day. Copeland kept his men together, organizing them into groups, assigning leaders, and making them count off every hour, shaking awake anyone who did not respond. Falling asleep meant death by slipping under the water. 14 men died over 3 days, but 95 survived because Copeland refused to let them give up. At 7:45 a.m. on October 27th, a patrol craft, PC-1119, spotted the survivors. Approaching cautiously due to fear of Japanese decoys, the PC called out and asked who won the World Series. An American voice yelled back, "St. Louis Cardinals," and the patrol craft moved in. Rescue took 4 hours, and 95 men were pulled from the water 50 hours after the Roberts sank. They were treated for dehydration, burns, wounds, infections, and fuel oil poisoning. The most serious cases were transferred to the hospital ship Comfort. The rest eventually sailed to San Francisco aboard the transport Lurline, arriving on December 4th. The battle off Samar became known as the greatest last stand in naval history. 7 small ships had turned back 23 Japanese warships, saving an entire invasion fleet and preventing a disaster that could have prolonged the Pacific War by months. Admiral Chester Nimitz called it the Navy's finest hour. The Roberts received the Presidential Unit Citation, Lieutenant Commander Copeland received the Navy Cross. Paul Carr received the Silver Star posthumously. In 1985, the Navy commissioned the guided missile frigate USS Carr, named for the gunner who died holding his last shell. The frigate USS Copeland was commissioned in 1982. In June 2022, the wreck of the Roberts was found by explorer Victor Vescovo, 22,621 feet down 4.3 miles, making it the deepest shipwreck ever discovered. The last survivor, Adrian Leonard, died just 3 months before his ship was found. This is the story of the tiny destroyer escort that fought like a battleship, the ship that charged the Yamato, and the crew that refused to surrender.